All right, guys, so now we're going to get into some server-side validation. All right, now what I want to do here is create a bunch of different files for each aspect of our application. So we're going to have a folder. I'm going to create a new folder called validation. And inside here, we'll have, for instance, let's create a file called register.js. And this will have all the rules for our registration. Let's create a new file called login.js for our login rules. Okay, and we're going to be using the validator module, which I believe we installed. Let me just double check. Yeah, so we have validator here. And I can pull up the documentation for that. Let's say validator GitHub. Now, this module will validate strings, and you can validate like is empty, which is right here, is float, is number, is credit card, is alpha. So it has a bunch of different things here. Is email, so you can validate, make sure it's a valid email address. There's a lot of different things. The one issue with this is it has to be a string that you're validating. So like is empty has to be a string. So we're actually going to have to do something a little extra as well, which I'll show you. But let's go ahead and let's go into, let's see, validation register.js. And we're going to bring in validator. So we're going to set that to require validator. All right, now we want to export. We want to say module.exports equals function, and we're going to call this validate register input. Okay, each of these files will have its own function name, and then this is going to take in data. Okay, so basically we'll be able to access this function from outside. So in here we're going to initialize a variable called errors, and we're going to set that to just an empty object. Okay, and then we're going to do, for instance, let's say the name on the registration, we want it to be at least 2 characters but no longer than 30 characters. So we could say if not validator dot isLength. Okay, it has an isLength method, and we'll pass in data dot name, okay, which will come in right here. This will be an object of stuff to validate. Name will be one of them. And then it takes in a second parameter, and we want to define the minimum, which will be 2, and the max, which will be 30. Okay, now if there is an error here, then we're going to say errors. We're going to take that object and we're going to add a name key and set the value to the message. Name must be between 2 and 30 characters. Okay, so that's an example of a validation. Now at the end here, we need to return an object with the errors, which would be errors, so we can just do errors once. And then we also want to return if it's valid or not. So is valid errors. Now, the issue that we have right here is valid. We want this to be, we want to check to see if this is empty. Now, there is an isEmpty method that comes with validator, but again, it has to be a string. Errors is an object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a global method or a global function called isEmpty that we can use on anything. We can use it on a string, an object. We can use it to see if it's null, if it's even there or not. We're going to need that. We could use isEmpty from Lodash, but I want to try to minimize the libraries that we use here. So we're just going to create it ourselves. So in the validation folder, let's create a new file, and we're going to call it is-empty.js. All right, and what we'll do here is create a function called isEmpty. I'm going to refactor this as an arrow function after. But let's say isEmpty. It'll take in a value, and we want to return. And in here we can say if the value is equal to undefined, or if the value is equal to null, or let's do it on an object. If the type of value is equal to an object and the object dot keys, pass in the value. If the keys dot length is equal to 0, that means that it's an empty object, right? Because we're looking at the keys. If there isn't any, then it's an empty object. Or finally, if it's a string, so we're going to say wait a minute, did I do this right? Yeah, so let's do same thing, type of. So type of just checks the type, the data type. But if we're going to say type of value is equal to a string and value dot, we're going to use the trim method here to trim it off if the length is equal to 0. Okay, so that's my specialized isEmpty function that will check for undefined, it'll check for null, it'll check for an empty object, it'll check for an empty string. As opposed to the validator's isEmpty, which is only going to check for an empty string. Now, if we want to refactor this, what we can do is say const isEmpty equals, and then we have the parameter, and then we have an arrow function like that. Okay, and if I save it, the parentheses will go away. Now all we have to do, actually we can refactor this even more. Since it's an arrow function, we don't even need these curly braces, and we don't need the return. We can simply do that. And we'll just put a semicolon here. And then let's be sure to export this so that we can use it. Like that. All right, so let's go back to register. And now we can just wrap this in isEmpty, which we'll have to bring in. So let's go up here and say import isEmpty from /isEmpty. We're going to use this isEmpty function on the client side as well. But let's save this. And let's go to our users route. Go to the very top here under where we brought everything in. And let's say load input validation. So we're going to say const validate register input equals require // validation / register. Okay, and now inside the register route, before we do anything, and we're going to be doing this for just about every route that takes in data, we want to pull out the errors and isValid from this right here. We want to pull these out of this function that we just brought in, and we can use destructuring for that. So we'll say const errors and isValid, and we're going to pull that out of validate register input, and what we want to pass in is request.body. Okay, request.body includes everything that's sent to this route, which in this case will be the name, email, and password. Okay, we're going to add some more rules to the register.js in the validation folder, but let's just try this out. Now, if there are errors, so the way that we check to see if there's errors, if this value is valid, is false. Okay, so we're going to say if not is valid. Let's just put a comment here. We'll say check validation. And this is like our first line of validation. We have some more validation down here that has to do with the database, like if there's an email that exists and so on. But this is like our first line of validation, if it's empty, things like that. So let's say if there's any errors, then we want to return res.status 400.json. And we want to send along the entire errors object. Okay. And in here you can see we start off with an empty errors, and if everything passes, it'll still be empty at the end and it'll be valid. If not, then it'll get filled, and then this will be, it won't be empty and it won't be valid, and this will return all the errors. Okay. So let's try this. Let's save it. Looks like we got an error here. Unexpected token import. Let's see. Where are we? Register.js. Import is empty from is empty. Module.exports. Oh, I used ES6 here. This should be const. I don't know why I did that. Const is empty equals require. All right. Okay, so now let's go to Postman, and let's we'll open up a new tab here, and we'll do a register. So localhost, we want, actually it's right here, register. And let's send, let's see, let's go to body. And let's send a name with just one character. There we go. Name must be between 2 and 30 characters. Now we're going to want to send more rules as well. But we're running out of time here, so what we'll do in the next video is we'll add the rest of our rules to the register validation. We'll also add to the login validation. And then from now on, any route that's going to take in data, any route that's going to take in request.body, we're going to just add this at the beginning. Okay, we're going to bring in the file, pass in request.body, and check to see if these whatever rules are in this file passed. Okay, and then we'll continue on here. And actually a better way to do this, instead of directly putting this in here like for the email existing, what we could do is, now that we have this errors object, we can just say errors dot email equals email already exists, and then we can simply pass in here errors. All right, so we'll continue this validation in the next video.